Hello everybody, this is John from pythonbeginners.com, welcoming you to lesson 5 of my Python Essentials free course at my website. So let's take a look at what's in store for lesson 5. Today we're going to talk about loops in Python. So a loop is basically a way for you to repeat sections of code in your program. It's a very powerful way to get your program to do a lot of things without you having to write a lot of code. So there's essentially two ways that we are going to look at for repeating code in Python. There's this thing called the for loop, and there's a thing called a while true loop. So a for loop is a way to repeat a section of code a fixed or predetermined number of times. So I can say, hey program, I want you to repeat these 5 lines of code exactly 10 times. There's also the while true loop that will repeat a section of code until a condition is met. So we can say, hey program, I want you to repeat these 5 lines of code until this person gets all of the answers right, or until this person runs out of time, or until this user loses all of their life points. So we just keep going until something happens, and then we finally stop. So we're going to take a look at the for loop first and look at it in a closer way. For loops are pretty simple to start with. To start a for loop, you just use the word for, and you have a variable to represent basically a counter to keep track of how many times you're looping. So I'm going to use x in this case here, and I'm going to say for x in range 1, 10. What that means is let x be the numbers 1 to 10, but not including 10. So essentially the numbers 1 to 9. So this example here was done right in the idle shell, and if you type this out in the idle shell and you press run, you're going to get the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So essentially all I'm doing is I'm printing the value x from 1 to 9. We can also do it sort of in the same line. So if I wanted to print, say, x and end it with comma space, what I'm going to do is basically print the numbers right across from left to right. So this example here uses a for loop, and we're still using x in range 1 to 21. This means let x be the numbers 1 to 20. And when I go to print them, then I'll see them coming across like this because of this way I've added this end to the end of my print statement. All right, so maybe I'll start by showing you this example live in my idle shell. So if I just restart my shell here, or I'll just clear my shell, I guess, is what I'm going to do. And I'll shrink it down a little bit. There we go. Okay, so if I type for x in range 1, 21, and then you got to put a colon. And then when I press enter, Python's going to indent my code. So anything that's indented here is going to be repeated or looped. So all I'm going to do is just loop one line of code. I'm going to print for 20 times the value of x, and I'm going to end it with space, quote, space. Okay, and if I press enter once and then twice, it executes that code. So you can see the numbers 1 to 20 shoot across the screen. All right, we can also go backwards in our for loop. So if I go like this, for example, for y in range 10, -1, -1. And I will do the same, print y end equals quote, comma, space, quote. All right, so I'll press enter once, press enter twice, and it counts down from 10 to 0. So how that works is I'm saying let y be the numbers 10 down to 0. So -1 isn't included in that, so it goes to the last number before -1, which is 0. This third optional parameter here is to say how much I want to change y by. So I want to go backwards by 1 at a time. So by putting this all together, I'm basically counting backwards from 10 to 0. Okay. Another variation in the loop is to go forwards by a different amount than by 1 all the time. So I can say something like this. For decades in range starting at the year 1900, going to the year 2001, 10. So essentially what I'm doing is printing the decades from 1900, and then it's going to be 1910, 1920, 1930, all the way up to the year 2000. Okay, and for now I'm just going to print those decades. So decades end equals quote, comma, quote. Okay, I don't have to put this end part here. That's just to get it to stay all on the same line. So if I print that, there's the decades from 1900 to 2000. I'll finish off with one more simple for statement. I'm going to go backwards by 2 degrees at a time. So for temp, which is my temperature, in range, we'll start at, say, 70. We'll go down to 30, and we'll change by 2 degrees backwards each time. And this time I'm just going to simply print temp and not put the end in, and you're going to see each temp come out on a separate line. Okay, so there it goes, counting down from 70 all the way down to 32. Now, all I've shown you so far is just the way to start a for loop. If that's all we use for loops for, was to generate a sequence of numbers, it wouldn't be all that useful. But what I want to do now is show you 3 or 4 different sample programs from my website that show you more useful ways to use loops in actual programming situations. So if I scroll down to those examples, we're going to start with a really simple one here that predicts the population of the world going up by 10 years at a time for the next 100 years. And I'm making the assumption that the population is going to grow by 11% per decade. So I say pop plus equals, which means increases by 11% times pop. So we're just increasing it by 11% every decade. So I'm going to copy this little piece of code here, and I'm going to put it into my Python programming window, and I will just save it and run it, and here's what we're going to get. So it's printing out the years by 10 years at a time from 2016 to 2116, and look at the population. It's growing by 11% each decade, meaning that by the time we get to the year 2116, we're going to have a whopping 19.88 billion people on our planet. That's awfully crowded. Now, this is just a model that assumes we're going to grow by 11% every decade. Obviously, that's not going to necessarily be accurate, but it was just kind of a fun exercise to see what would happen if we grow by 11%. So what's happening in this program is we are repeating these 2 lines of code for every decade between 2016 and 2116, so for the next 100 years. All right, let's take a look at another more pragmatic example. So this is a simple little program that keeps track of your golf score in a golf game of 9 holes. So I'm going to copy and paste this right into my programming window, and we'll take a look at this and explain it to you. So we're going to start with a score of 0, and we're going to go through 9 holes of golf. So to say that, we say for hole in range 1, 10. Now I could also put comma 1 here, but if I don't put that third optional parameter in, it's assuming that I'm going up by 1 at a time. All right, so for each hole, I'm asking for the shots in that hole. Enter your shots for hole %D. Remember, this is a placeholder for the variable hole. So it'll be hole 1, 2, 3, etc. And then I'm saying score increases by the int version of those shots. So shots comes in just as an input, which will be a string. This converts it to a number, and at the same time I'm adding it to into my score. So after 9 holes, this will repeat, and then when it's done, it'll come out and do this 1 line of code at the very end to print my final score. So let's see how I did on this game of golf. I'm going to run this, and it's going to bring me back to the idle shell, and you can see down here it's asking me for my shots on hole number 1. So right now hole is the first number in the range, and I'm stuck on this line of code right here. So I'll put, say I got 7, off to a bad start. So it loops back up, and now hole is 2, and it's asking me for my shots again. So as I add my shots for each hole, once I get to the last hole, I got a hole in 1 on the last hole, really I did, I'm going to press enter this time, and it's going to come out of the loop and print the entire total for the whole game. So I got 33. That's actually really good. I've never got 33 on 9 holes of golf, but it's always good to fantasize. But you can see how this simple program is a powerful way to loop through the holes of a golf game and just accumulate my score. All right, let's take a look at another example. So in my site, I do go back to lists again. So if you have been following along on my other lessons, you would have seen lesson 2 way back when we talked about lists. And I did mention in that lesson that we're going to be looking at lists a little bit more closer when we get to a future lesson. So that lesson is here and now. So for loops are a great way to travel through a list. This example here is a fairly extensive one. I think what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste it into my programming window, and we'll just explain it from there. So I'm just going to paste it into here. Now I noticed when I did this and I copied it into my website, a few things got lost along the way. So for example, everywhere where I've got n, it's meant to be /n, and everywhere where I've got a t, it's supposed to be a /t. So let me just go in here and quickly fix that. All right, so maybe what I'll do first is I will try to run this program, and then we can talk about what it does later. That's, of course, when I fix up the other syntax error here. Let's try that one more time. All right, so what it's going to do is it's going to ask me for my marks in my different subjects. So I'll put them in, and at the end it's going to print me a little report card telling me how I did overall. Okay, so there's my report card. It prints back my list of marks and my subjects and the average. So that's not overly exciting, but there's a lot of under the hood things that are happening that make this kind of an interesting program for for loops and lists. So take a look at the code here. So I have a list called courses, which is math, science, history, and English. If you're using a for loop for the purpose of traveling through a list like this, we can say something like this: for course in courses. So I'm saying let course be a variable that represents each of these courses one at a time. So when I say something like mark equals input, enter mark for %s, which is course, it's going to loop through and it's going to ask me first for math and then science and history, and you can see how it did that right over here. Okay, in fact, why don't I put these beside each other so we can see the output and the code side by side. So as I'm entering my marks, I'm converting them ints, and I'm also appending them to another list. So this marks list starts out as an empty list, and using this for loop, I'm building it one mark at a time. By the time I'm done running this 4 times, I now have another list, which is my list of marks. All right, so then I'm going to use another for loop to travel through the marks array to calculate my average. Now, I could have gone for mark in marks, but I went back to the old way just to show you that you can also do it this way as well. Remember, my list marks and my list courses has 4 locations that start at 0. So I've got math at 0, science is 1, history is 2, English is 3. So I can use X to represent those locations from 0 to 3, but I have to say 0, 4. So here I am traveling through the marks list, and I'm taking each mark and I'm plus equaling it into average, which means I'm accumulating the 4 marks into a total and then dividing it by 4 to get my overall average. So for my third trick up my sleeve, I go into a final loop, and this is like the first loop for course in courses, only this time I'm actually traveling through 2 lists at the same time. This is pretty cool. So I'm using 2 variables, subject and mark. How I travel through 2 lists at the same time in Python is using this keyword zip. So zip just combines 2 lists together. So I'm saying basically in my code, I want to travel through both these lists together at the same time. So I'm going to zip them up. And for both of these lists, I'm going to have a variable represent each item in each list. So subject is going to be my variable for each of the courses and mark for marks. And all I'm doing in this list is simply just printing out the marks and the courses like you see here. So that's what this code here is doing. So the other little trick, notice how this is all spaced out evenly here with the numbers right on top of each other. So I looked this up online, I have to confess, but the way you can do that is you can take each subject and format it into a box that's exactly 15 spaces long. So it doesn't matter how long the subject actually is, it's going to pad it for the leftover spaces till it gets to 15, and so we'll have this nice evenly spaced list of subjects so the marks line up together perfectly. Once it's done this for loop, it's going to come back out and it's going to print the average, which it does down here on a new line, and tab over to the average, which in this case was 82. All right, so different ways to use for loops, but a very powerful tool when working with lists. Equally powerful in my last example for loops is how to use them for strings. So again, if you looked at my previous lesson, I believe it was lesson 3 on strings, we looked at strings and we basically said a string is like a list of letters. So when we store this sentence, my favorite foods are Captain Crunch cereal and cashews, which is true by the way, and I store it into phrase, essentially what I'm getting is a list of letters. So I can use a for loop in the same way to travel through each letter and examine it and do whatever I want to. So for example, in this little program, I'm just counting the vowels that I have in this sentence. Now, should some of those vowels be capital letters, to be safe, I'm converting it to lowercase first so that I don't have to deal with the fact that it might be capitals. And so here's how I travel through the phrase one letter at a time. I say for letter in phrase. And then within this for loop, I'm basically asking this question for each letter. If that letter is an A, E, I, O, or U, I'm adding 1 to vowels. This print statement doesn't happen until I've traveled through every letter in the phrase. And when it's done that, it comes back out and it prints the summary of what it found or what it counted. So there is no input for this. I'm not asking for a phrase. I'm just assigning it to this phrase here. So whenever I run this, I get the same results every time. So I'm not going to bother throwing this into the Python programming shell. I'll just show you down here what happens. So if I ran this, I would see this output. There are 18 vowels in My Favorite Foods Are Captain Crunch, etc. So you can come back and you can count every letter E and A and I, O, U, and you will get to exactly 18. So I verified that, and this program does work. But also, sort of as a final example, what a handy way to use a for loop to travel through letters in a phrase. So you've seen some versatile ways to use the for loop. I don't want to end this video yet until I talk about the other kind of loop, which is also very powerful and useful, and that one's called the while true loop. Now, because this video is getting a little bit long, I'm just going to show you one example, but this example really does go a long way to explaining how while true loops work. So I think what I'll do is I will just copy this and we'll paste it one last time into our programming window, and we will take a look at what this program does. So let me paste it first, and I will save it and run it. But first I have to fix the syntax. Oh yeah, so another thing too, when I copy and paste code onto my website, for some reason it wants to put a space here when I use less than and equal to. So if you do copy and paste my code, you will have to come through and fix that as well. So I fixed that. So this program should run now, but I want to explain it to you first before I run it. So what I'm trying to do here is ask a person to enter a number from 1 to 100, and when they do, the computer's going to respond and randomly pick numbers from 1 to 100 until it matches the number that I picked. All right, so I'm using 2 while true loops here to accomplish this. So remember what I said earlier about while true. While true loops just keep repeating until they break. So inside of a while true, you need to stick a simple if statement that provides the rules for breaking. So with this first while true loop, this code is going to keep going until I myself enter a number between 1 and 100. Because here it says if my num is greater than 0 and less than equal to 100, then break. That means leave the loop immediately. Okay, so this won't even happen. This print statement will get skipped over because of the break if I'm breaking the loop. If I'm not breaking the loop, that means I did not enter a number between 0 and 100. So instead it's going to print this error message and say try again. And I'm going to get stuck here until I print or enter a number between 0 and 100. So it's a great way to trap a user until they do what you want them to do. Pretty handy. Once I finally do follow the instructions and give them a number that they're asking for, it will break out of this loop, but then it's going to enter a second while true loop where the computer's going to take over, and it's going to randomly generate numbers from 1 to 100 and count each one as a try and print that try and the number that it picked. And it's just going to keep doing this over and over again until it picks the number that I chose. And so when computer number equals my number, it will break out of the loop, and then it'll finally come down here and print a one-line summary and say it took however number of tries it took to match your number. All right, so when I run this program, we're going to get different results every time because it depends on how quickly I follow the instructions for this loop. But then more importantly, it depends how long it takes for the computer to find a number that matches mine or to pick the number that matches mine. Sometimes it happens right away. Sometimes it takes several hundred attempts. So we'll run this live right now in the lesson and we'll see what we get. So I will press F5 and I'm assuming there are no more errors. And I think we're good to go. So over here in the idle shell, the program has started. And so right now it's asking me for a number from 1 to 100. So maybe I can do another one of these split screens. And essentially what's happening here is it's on this line right here. Now, if I don't enter a number from 1 to 100, say I enter 799, that's not good enough. So I'm basically stuck inside the loop. So it looked at my number. It was not between 0 and 100, did not break, printed this instead, and came right back up, and now I'm back stuck up here again. So this time around, I will put in a number, And then we're just going to let the program run and see what it does. So I'm going to say, computer, I want you to try to match the number 45. Do your best. So here we go. Enter. And you can see the computer's trying its best. It's picking numbers, and then finally after 67 tries, notice the number it picked was 45. If you come back up and look at this list, you will not see another 45 anywhere up here because it was told to stop when it got to 45, and that's exactly what it did. Okay, but I can run this program again and I can get entirely different results, even if I pick the number 45 again. So let me do just that. I'm going to run this one more time, and I'm going to ask again for the computer to match my number of 45, and let's see how long it takes this time. So 35, so it did much better. So you never know how long it's going to take. It just depends on how long it takes for the condition to get met. So there's no one right way to repeat code in Python. If you're working with lists, I recommend for loops. If you need to repeat code that's going to run indefinitely until something is happening, you're waiting for something to happen, then definitely while true is the way to go. So that basically sums up my lesson on loops. I will leave you with one more little thing though. If you do visit my website and try some of this code, you'll notice at the bottom of every lesson I do have also a Google slideshow. I do teach Python in a real classroom environment, and I use these Google Slides to teach my live class every day some of these same concepts. So I threw this in here just as an extra resource to invite you to go through. Some of the examples are the same, but there are some different ones in here as well. So you can definitely go through this and get some more ideas and more background on how loops work. But that's essentially another resource that you can use and another reason to come to my website, pythonbeginners.com. So as always, this is John from pythonbeginners.com. Thank you for watching my lesson on loops, and hopefully I'll see you back for lesson number 6, which is going to be on dictionaries. Bye for now.